saying that Time magazine is controlled by the Soviet Union. No, or the communists. I'm not saying that at all. I'm simply saying that they parroted and repeated the same mistake that started in Moscow in December of 1960. And it's interesting. Like we mentioned Time magazine. To be honest with you, and we in the Birch Society we have also our own magazine called the New American, and it's like Time in its appearance and all that, but perspective is entirely different. And you talk about, I mentioned Time magazine. To be honest with you, Time magazine is its perspective. I would not even believe the page number of Time magazine. To be honest with you, I think they're so far off with their perspective. But what happens is this. Robert Welch sends word to the FBI. He says, look, we're being hammered, we're being smeared, the accusations are libelous in nature, they're not true, investigate us. And so word comes back through the FBI, look, we're not going to investigate the John Birch Society. You guys are not even on the Attorney General's list of subversives, we're not going to do the investigation. So Robert Welch then turns to Governor Pat Brown of California, who is a liberal Democrat. He says, will you please investigate us? Because at that time, there were a ton of members of the John Birch Society out in the state of California, especially the Orange County area. And so Welch says, Governor Brown, will you have the state of California conduct an investigation on the John Birch Society? And Governor Brown smiled and he said, very gladly, we'll do the investigation. The investigation is conducted from June of 1961 through June of 1963 by the California State Senate Fact-Finding Subcommittee on Un-American Activities. It's made up of 6 liberal Democrats. To their credit, they admit up front, they say, the principles that the John Birch Society stands for, we don't agree with them. And we're going to tell you that up front, but they said, we're going to let our investigators conduct their investigation, and then we shall report their findings. And that's what they do. And all these various isms that were labeled against the John Birch Society. For example, when I ran into the John Birch Society when I was teaching American history in 1977, the misconception I had was racism and anti-Semitism. The organization had something against blacks and Jews. And then I'm told by somebody, well, that statement would come as quite a surprise to our black and Jewish members. And so something told me, something simply is not right here, and I needed to investigate this organization. But the various smears that were labeled against the John Birch Society, and you can go online and get this, it's called the California Report. And it's about a 90-page report on this 2-year investigation. This committee, this Senate committee out in California, they're actually going to give us a clean bill of health. They're going to say that the stuff that the Birch Society was racist, anti-Semitic is a bunch of rubbish, that it's secretive, it's not true, fascist, Nazis, communists, all of the isms. They actually give us a clean bill of health. And once again, I would encourage you to go home tonight and get online and check out something which is called the California Report. The John Birch Society itself, just real quickly, is an education action organization. The slogan simply is less government, more responsibility, and with God's help, a better world. And in waging this crusade, education is our total strategy. Truth is our only weapon. Birch Society itself is nonpartisan. We don't back political parties. We don't back political candidates. If you think about it from this point of view, it would be the epitome of arrogance on my part to tell you who to vote for. I don't have any right to push my opinions down your throat. Plus, you have the civic responsibility to study the issues and the candidates. And our contention is this: if you're reading the proper material, and you're educating yourselves and doing your homework and studying the issues and the candidates, come election day, you're going to make the proper decision once you enter that voting booth. Our goal primarily, there's a lot of issues out there. And if your mail is like my mail, you're probably receiving many solicitations on a weekly basis. I won't mention other groups by name. I'll put them into a category, and I'll let you determine if my categorizing the mail you get falls into this category. We refer see, we call them the Beltway Bandits. And they're very slick at writing letters. It seems like they overdo their letters, to be honest with you. They send way too many. And they write on the current hot button issue of the day, and then they'll say to the people, to the person receiving the letter, they're going to say, oh, by the way, can you send us a check? And that's, their activity essentially ends there. They will say, for example, some of these groups, and I believe them, but I think you have to define your terminology many times. They'll be asked, well, how many members does your organization have? They'll say, well, 200,000. And I believe that figure, but then, you actually have to define what constitutes membership in these groups. And what it is, these individuals are on a mailing list, and, maybe they send in contributions, maybe they don't. But, if that constitutes a member, then yeah, I guess these groups have 200,000 members, but it's, for the most part, it simply is simply a mailing list, is what it is. But our thinking is the two key choke point issues where we absolutely must prevail are preserving our national sovereignty and preserving our Constitution, the supreme law of the land. If we win other skirmishes, yeah, they can be important battles, but you know what, folks? If we don't win the two choke point battles of Constitution and sovereignty, the ball game is over. We hold in very high regard the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. It's interesting with the Declaration of Independence, written primarily by Thomas Jefferson, and it's a document written in July of 1776 indicating the reasons why the American colonies are separating from the British. But it's interesting, in the second paragraph, Jefferson will write, and I'll quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed." Wow, I'll tell you what, Jefferson has said a mouthful with those words. He's saying three very, very important things. Number one, right off the bat, the very foundation of our country. Number one, right off the bat, he's saying what he's saying. He's saying that there is a God. Number two, he's saying that our rights come from God. And thirdly, that the purpose of government is to protect these God-given rights. The Constitution, of course, is the supreme law of the land. We see the Declaration of Independence as being the promise. We see the Constitution as being the fulfillment of that promise. Now, our domestic beliefs, once again, are consistent with what is in the Constitution. We believe in lower taxes, less government, basic morality, a strong national defense, and of course adherence to the Constitution, the supreme law of the land. In terms of foreign policy, I'll just read you something, and this is actually a quote, and I have this book on the book table. Dr. Steve Bonta, a graduate of Cornell University, about a decade ago, had written a little book for us entitled Inside the United Nations. Dr. Bonta is going to quote some of the early presidents that we had in this country, and I think these views indicate what the true foreign policy of the United States should be. I'll go to our first president, President George Washington, in his farewell address of September 1796, advised Americans, "It is our true policy to steer clear of permanent alliances with any portion of the foreign world." President Thomas Jefferson stated, "Our first and fundamental maxim should be never to entangle ourselves in the broils of Europe." And finally, President John Quincy Adams said, "America goes not abroad in search of monsters to destroy. She is a well-wisher of the freedom and independence of all." And then Dr. Bonta writes, "All of these statements amount to a very simple principle as sound in international affairs as they are in personal conduct. Mind your own business." So, you make a statement like that, people will say, well, that means you're an isolationist. And no, we're not isolationists at all, we're simply non-interventionists. And if we don't have a country that is threatening the United States, we have no problem whatsoever, trading with such a country. But on the other hand, nations which are bellicose in nature, which are expansionist in nature, which enslave their own people, individuals like that, we don't believe in selling the town bully brass knuckles, so to speak. We don't think it's a good idea. Now, the form of government that we have, I think I don't have to preach to the choir on this, but 99% of the American people, if you ask them what form of government that the founding fathers gave us in the Constitution, they're going to say what? They're going to say democracy. And I'll tell you what, the 13 years I taught American history, I would always say to the kids, I'd say, look, I'm a man of my word, so I'm going to keep my word, but see if you can obtain this $1,000 offer I'm going to give you. And I'd say to them, I'll give you $1,000 if you can find the word democracy in the Constitution. And of course, I never lost that wager because the word democracy is not in the Constitution. And I cannot tell you how many debates I had, even with social studies teachers, who were good people, who were simply misinformed or not educated at all on our form of government. Now, I'd like to tell you that I was smarter than all of them before I ran into the John Birch Society. And my education at Wright State University, they taught me that that we were not a democracy and we were a republic. But I'm going to have to plead guilty and stupid on that myself, because I myself was ignorant. And you'd say to these social studies teachers, you'd say, well, they'd say the words are interchangeable. I'd say, no, they're not. Democracy, that word is that the etymology is Greek, and republic, that word is Latin. So they cannot mean the same. Well, then we're a democratic republic. And I'd say, no. You can't make up your own definitions. Now, what exactly is democracy? The etymology of the word is from two Greek words, demos and kratein. Okay, demos meaning people, kratein meaning rule by the people. Democracy is government by men. It's not government by law, but it's government by men. The best example of democracy in action is a lynch mob. Let's just say hypothetically, all of us are the lynch mob, and old Mark is the horse thief, and we make the determination, we've got the right guy, and this guy's a horse thief, so what do? We take him out to town, and we take a rope, we put a rope around his neck, and we tie his hands behind his back, and we hit the posterior of the horse, and the horse runs off, and Mark is twisting and dangling until he breathes no more. Okay, that a lynch mob, majority rule, that is democracy in action. Now,
I think we're going to see it.
well, you know what we actually have from this point of view, in that, and I'll go back to the year of 1933 with the advent of the New Deal during the Great Depression. We saw Congress disobeying or ignoring the Constitution and essentially making up the rules as they went along when it came to their interpretation of the Constitution. And no, that